In this section, Fairley dissects the symbols of the European Union, attempting to find signs of evil. Let's see how he does. This is a common internet myth, but there's really no resemblance between the tower as depicted by Bruegel and the Parliament building, save that both are circular in some parts. Conspiracy theorists say both are alike and that both look unfinished. But if this were meant as an in-your-face to God, why wouldn't it be finished rather than unfinished? Other than that, the two buildings look absolutely nothing alike, and no designer of the building says anything about it being based on the Tower of Babel. In fact, the supposed resemblance is reinforced by a patent falsehood. Unfortunately, the only place I can find this story documented is on conspiracy theory websites and books. But if this poster ever existed in the real world, it had nothing to do with the EU building. I found a reference to the poster in a 1993 book titled Programming Pitfalls and Puppy Dog Tales, and it doesn't even relate it to the EU Parliament building, which is not surprising since it wasn't built until later that decade. I also found the poster referenced in a 1990 book by Dave Hunt, Global Peace and the Rise of the Antichrist, where it is said that he used the Tower of Babel and to be part of an official poster for the Council of Europe. That was well before even the design of the Parliament building. The variations of this account strongly suggest that it is merely a modern myth. The stars on the supposed poster are in perspective, not inverted, but it hardly matters since we still need proof that this poster was for real in the first place. And for what it's worth, I asked a friend in Europe if he remembered such a poster and any controversy over it, and he said no. This is sort of true. An article on this subject from The Economist offers the following. So in a way, Fairley is right, but he doesn't grasp that these Catholic pictures of Mary are derived from an understanding that Mary is the woman in Revelation 10. That's not an unreasonable understanding of the figure, and it's also believed by some scholarly interpreters, although my view is that the woman represents Israel. I won't look for quotes verifying what was said by the popes because given their adherence to the Great Commission, this would arguably represent their views. The connection between Mary and Asherah is simply paranoia based on earlier mistakes. Fairley doesn't explain himself sufficiently to be sure, but what he probably refers to is a symbol for the concilium, a smaller body within the EU. Looking at that symbol, I think it far more likely, especially given the name of the body, that it was meant to be an above view of a conference table, not an eye. But even if it were an eye, this would hardly mean it was an all-seeing eye. We can find plenty of optometrists who use the eye as a symbol, and that doesn't turn them into occultists. It's true that Beethoven's Ode to Joy has been chosen as the anthem, and Schiller's poem was in mind, although officially the anthem is an instrumental. But Fairley has the words wrong. The 1785 version will be used here for comparison, with Fairley's clean version on the left and the 1785 version on the right. The real words anthropomorphize joy as a being, albeit one subordinate to God in the remainder of the poem. This is not to say that Schiller's poem is in accord with Christian views. It's definitely more in line with a sort of theistic humanism. But it's also not, as Fairley claims, about unity with the divine. Nor does it say we may become as gods ourselves. And it speaks not of literal drunkenness, but of being drunk with joy in a metaphorical way. As one might say, drunk with power. The fire and magic are metaphors for joy. It's idealized pap, but hardly wicked stuff as Fairley claims and in the way he claims. This is true, but it commits an error common to atheists, collapsing down descriptions to force an illicit match. By way of example, Jesus' resurrection is often compared to the bringing back to life of the Egyptian deity Osiris. Critics call both a resurrection, but they're not. Jesus had a true resurrection, a restoration of his body of flesh into a glorified state. In contrast, Osiris' rejuvenation was performed by way of the nature of his body as an Egyptian deity. In the same way, Fairley has used the broad description woman riding a beast to draw an illicit parallel between the EU symbol and the woman in Revelation. And let's remember what's said of the latter. The symbol of the EU looks nothing like this. The beast doesn't have 7 heads and 10 horns, it's not scarlet, and it doesn't have blasphemous names all over it. It is, in fact, as Fairley admits, a plain old bull. The woman doesn't have purple and scarlet clothes and is loaded down with neither jewelry nor cup, and her forehead doesn't serve as a billboard. And the EU isn't even headquartered at Rome, which is the likely city of 7 hills intended here. The figure of the EU is Europa and the bull. Europa was the maiden who was raped by Zeus when he was in the form of a bull. That does seem an odd symbol for the EU, but as one source explains, it's not even determined why it has been chosen as a symbol. So in other words, this symbol has no resemblance in meaning or effect to the symbol in Revelation, except by reducing them both to vague generalities while ignoring the vast differences. Beyond that, Fairley's attempt to equate Europa with Asherah is simply unsupportable. There's no historical, thematic, or any other sort of connection between the two figures. Fairley's one attempt to force a connection fails badly. I can't find any reputable source that says Europa was ever called the Queen of Heaven. The most that can be said of this is that the 2nd century Roman writer Lucian made a guess at some connection between Europa and a different goddess, Ishtar, but not Asherah. The actual myth has Zeus fathering sons of hers that become earthly rulers, but says nothing about her becoming Queen of Heaven. Technically, the Commission is an executive branch that proposes legislation. It's true they're not elected. They're appointed by their national governments, but this would be no different than the Supreme Court in America. There's also a way to change who your commission member is. Change your government members who appoint them. Here's a summation of the functions of each body. In essence, this is checks and balances in action. Fairley needs to explain why every branch has to be democratic. That would hardly be a problem since their job is to represent the EU as a whole, not just their own nation. That said, here's a look at the oath. You could frame this in negative terms as Fairley does and call it abandoning any national allegiance. But you could also frame it positively, as looking out only for the interest of others. The point is, these people serve a wider range of interests, and that's only a problem if you make it into one. Elected dictators are sort of like the square circle. But here again the answer is simple. You just diselect the people who pick them in your home country and elect someone who wants to get out of the EU. I don't know about sneaking off, but Fairley's views here do represent one held by some people in Britain. Since I'm not British, I won't presume to speak to his politics. I'll refer viewers to an article linked in the vid description for more information. I'll pass on the rest of Fairley's vid as political opinion. Otherwise, this one gets a quarter tank.